I worked my entire life, built my fortune with my own two hands, yet I never earned the love of my only son. After I remarried, his resentment toward me grew like a shadow that never left. The more I invested in his education and business, the deeper my disappointment sank. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, he still found a way to shatter me. One afternoon, as I lay in a hospital bed, weak with tubes running through my body, he walked in with a woman I had never seen before. He said, "Mom, this is your daughter-in-law." Then, without shame, he demanded that I sign my entire estate over to her and the baby she was supposedly carrying. I looked at her flat stomach and their shameless faces, and in that moment, I had only one wish. Can you guess what it was? If not, stay with me until the end of this video. I promise my story won't disappoint you. My dear viewers, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support keeps stories like mine alive. It had been 3 years since I last heard from my son. 3 long years of silence where my phone never rang, the mailbox stayed empty, and even the Christmas cards stopped coming. The house echoed only with the sound of the clock ticking each second, reminding me that he had chosen distance over his own mother. I tried to tell myself he was busy, that life had pulled him elsewhere, but deep down I knew some silences are not made of time, but of choice. Even when we buried his stepfather, I waited. I watched every car that arrived at the cemetery, hoping one would stop, and he'd step out, his face softer than I remembered. But the seat beside me stayed cold and empty. When the pastor said his final words, I realized Liam wasn't coming. Not for his family, not for me. That day, something inside me settled into stillness, the kind that no prayer could shake loose. I told myself I was done waiting. I sold the lake house, donated his childhood clothes, and packed away every framed photo that still carried his smile. But mothers never truly stop waiting, do they? Even when we claim we've moved on, our hearts keep a spare key hidden somewhere just in case they ever come home. And then today, out of nowhere, the door of my hospital room opened. I was still recovering from surgery, my body weak, my mind floating between sleep and painkillers. The air shifted. I looked up, and there he was. Liam Turner, my son. The one who had vanished into silence now stood before me, wearing an expression so calm it chilled me. Beside him was a woman I had never seen before. Young polished, her fingers wrapped possessively around his arm. She smiled at me with the kind of sweetness that never reaches the eyes. Liam said nothing at first, just stood there watching me like I was a stranger he had to greet out of obligation. In that moment, I realized something colder than absence. He hadn't come back out of love. He had come back for a reason. And somehow, I knew that reason would hurt. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and fading hope. Machines hummed softly beside me, their lights blinking like tired eyes. I lay still, the IV needles pricking my skin, watching the door where my son had just appeared after 3 long, wordless years. My chest tightened as I looked at him, older now, sharper around the eyes, but colder too, like someone who had learned to live without warmth. "Mom," he said, his tone polite, distant. "You look weak. I just want to help you get everything settled so you can rest easy." His words were smooth, practice, the kind you'd use with a client, not your mother. The sound of that voice, my son's voice, felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone I once knew, but could never reach again. Before I could answer, the woman beside him stepped forward. Her perfume cut through the smell of antiseptic, sweet and heavy. She smiled with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it in the mirror. "I'm Lily Anderson, Liam's wife," she said gently, almost tenderly. Her hand rested on his arm, possessive, like a claim staked in plain sight. I stared at her elegant, perfect hair, polished nails, expensive handbag. Everything about her screamed control. 3 years of silence, and now my son returned with a stranger who introduced herself like a new chapter I had never agreed to read. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. I had imagined our reunion 1,000 times, tears, apologies, maybe even a quiet meal together. Instead, I got this formality distance and a woman whose eyes told me she already saw me as a fading signature on a will. So I said, softly, forcing my voice steady, "Married, are you? That's news to me." Liam looked away, just for a second, his jaw tightening. "We were going to tell you," he said, "but you know how life gets." His words felt like ice pressed against my skin. I could tell this visit wasn't about love or guilt or reconciliation. It was about business. The machines continued their rhythm beside me. Beep, pause, beep. I watched them both. My son standing like a stranger at the edge of my bed, his wife smiling as if she owned the room. 3 years ago, I would have reached for his hand. Now I simply folded my own together, keeping the last of my dignity between my fingers. Liam placed a thick stack of papers on the small hospital table beside my bed. The sound of it hitting the surface was sharp, deliberate. "Mom," he said, his tone calm but rehearsed. "Lily and I have prepared everything already. You just need to sign so your assets won't fall into the wrong hands." His words hung in the sterile air, like smoke filling every quiet corner of the room. I stared at the papers. The top page bore a law firm logo I didn't recognize. My eyes narrowed. The font was off the seal, slightly blurred. To anyone else, it might have looked legitimate, but I had handled enough documents in my life to know a fake when I saw one. It wasn't just clumsy, it was dangerous. Lily stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She smiled, placing an expensive Mont Blanc pen in front of me, the silver tip gleaming under the hospital light. Her voice was honey smooth, but the sweetness stung. "It would be best if you signed soon, Mom. You don't want to deal with unnecessary trouble later." I looked up at her, then at my son. Liam didn't meet my eyes. He stood by the window, pretending to check his phone, the same hands that once held mine now folded tightly, in discomfort, or perhaps guilt. His face was unreadable, but his silence said enough. This wasn't a son helping his mother. This was a man doing what someone else had taught him to do. The clock ticked loudly. I felt my heartbeat match its rhythm. 3 years of absence, and now they were here, asking not for forgiveness, but for my signature. My gaze lingered on the pen. Once upon a time, I had signed school permission slips, birthday cards, checks for his first car. Every signature had been an act of love. But this was a knife disguised as ink. I let my hand hover above the paper, pretending to read. Lily shifted slightly, impatient, her smile tightening. My voice came out soft, but steady. "I appreciate your concern," I said, eyes still on the document. "But before I sign anything, I'd like my lawyer to review it." Liam finally looked at me then. His eyes, once warm and full of life, were cold and gray like the winter sky after a storm. In that moment, I realized something had died long before this visit. My son was gone, and in his place stood a stranger who carried his face. Liam leaned closer, his shadow falling across my bed. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was steel beneath it. "If you don't sign, Mom, I can't promise what might happen. You're weak here alone. Anything could go wrong." Each word was careful, calculated, and cruel. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was one delivered with quiet confidence, the kind that came from believing I had no power left. I felt my pulse quicken, but my face remained calm. Beneath the blanket, my fingers inched toward the small red nurse call button, hidden by the folds of the sheet. The plastic felt cool against my skin, solid and certain, one small lifeline between me and whatever my son had become. He didn't notice. He was too focused on the papers, his lips pressed into a tight line, eyes dark and hollow. I remembered those same eyes years ago, bright and curious, when he used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. He was terrified of thunder then. I'd hold him close, whispering that no storm lasts forever. Now I wondered, when did the storm move inside him? When did it consume everything good? "Mom," he said sharply, his voice rising now, anger cracking through the practiced tone. "You're old. Stop being stubborn and just sign it." The words echoed in the small room, bouncing off the sterile walls. I could feel the air tighten, smell the faint trace of his cologne mixed with the antiseptic around us. His hand slammed against the metal tray, rattling the pen and papers. I didn't flinch. Then in one small motion, I pressed the button beneath the blanket. The faint click was drowned out by his breathing. A few seconds later, the door burst open. The nurse stepped in, her voice brisk and clear. "Is everything all right here?" I turned my head slowly toward Liam, my hand still resting on the bed. My voice was soft, but every word carried. "That's enough." He froze his jaw tight, his face pale for a brief, unguarded second. The mask slipped just long enough for me to see the fear behind the anger, the shame behind the greed. I was born and raised in Sonoma, California, a land where wine isn't just a drink, but the very rhythm of life. The air itself carries a faint sweetness of crushed grapes in autumn. And even as a child, I knew that everything in this town, the harvests, the celebrations, the stories began and ended in the vineyards. When I was 27, Charles Turner and I started with nothing but a few acres of stubborn soil and a dream that didn't quite fit our bank account. Charles used to say, if we can't afford fine wine, we'll just have to make it ourselves. We planted every vine by hand, watered them with faith and sweat, and built Harper vineyards from the ground up. For 40 years, discipline was the backbone of our lives. We woke before dawn, worked through heat and rain, and never shipped a single barrel without tasting it first. Some called us perfectionists. I called it respect for the craft, for the land, and for the people who trusted our name. I still remember the smell of oak barrels mingling with the scent of morning coffee. Charles humming as he checked the fermentation tanks. That rhythm, steady, simple, honorable, was the music of our marriage. As the years went on, Harper Vineyards grew. Our labels appeared in high-end restaurants across the country. I met investors, sommeliers, even celebrities who praised our work, but I never let glamour distract me. To me, wine was never about prestige. It was about legacy. I used to tell Charles, money can buy many things, but it can't buy the respect that comes from doing things right. When Charles passed away, the vineyard felt quieter, emptier, like it had lost its heartbeat. Yet I stayed. I tended the vines alone, walked the rows at sunrise, spoke to the land the way we used to, with care and gratitude. People called me stubborn, but I preferred another word, faithful. Faithful to a life built by discipline and dignity. Even now, as my hands tremble with age, I still believe what we built wasn't just a business, it was a promise. A promise that wealth should serve honor, not the other way around. Charles was a quiet man, gentle in spirit, but unwavering in principle. He believed in honesty the way some people believe in prayer. When we first started the vineyard, I was the dreamer, the one chasing perfection. He was the anchor. Whenever I grew impatient, he would smile and say, "Harper, let the quality speak for us." And it always did. Every bottle that left our cellar carried his calm, his patience, his pride. He wasn't loud about his love, but it was in everything he did, the way he covered the vines when frost was coming, the way he left a cup of coffee waiting for me every morning before dawn. We built a life not on luxury, but on devotion to our craft and to each other. When the diagnosis came pancreatic cancer, I thought the doctor had mistaken someone else's chart. Charles didn't smoke, rarely drank, and never took a day off. He simply looked at me that day and said, "Then we'll finish strong," and he meant it. I stayed by his side through every sleepless night, every faint breath. I mixed his medicine, changed the sheets, whispered to him about the vineyard, as if my words could keep him tethered to this world. Sometimes he would smile weakly and say, "Promise me you'll keep it running, Harper. Promise me you won't let greed touch what we built." I promised. And I've kept that promise every day since. The morning he passed, the air outside was thick with the scent of ripe grapes. The harvest had just begun, and the sweetness of the wine hung heavy, almost cruel, in its beauty. I stood alone in the middle of the field, surrounded by the life we had nurtured together, and for the first time in 40 years, the vineyard felt silent. It wasn't just him who was gone, it was the heartbeat of our home. We held a simple funeral, just close family, and the workers who had been with us from the beginning. The sky was soft gray, the kind Charles always loved before rain. People spoke kind words, raised a glass in his honor, and I stood there listening, numb but grateful. Yet amid all the faces, one was missing: Liam Turner, our only son. He didn't come, not to the hospital, not to the burial. The seat we had saved for him stayed empty, the flowers beside it untouched. That absence, quiet cold, deliberate hurt more than any storm could. It was the day I realized that losing a husband is grief, but losing a child's heart is something far worse. Liam was my only child, the one I once believed would carry the best of me forward. He was born from my first marriage, a brief, turbulent chapter that ended when his father walked out, leaving me alone with a 6-year-old boy and a mortgage I could barely afford. From that day on, I swore my son would never feel the kind of abandonment I did. I worked long hours at the vineyard, took on bookkeeping for neighbors at night, and saved every cent to give him a better life. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. I taught him to read by candlelight during power outages, packed his lunches with handwritten notes, and bought him secondhand toys polished to look new. But as Liam grew older, something changed. The sweetness in him, the curiosity, the laughter began to harden into entitlement. He didn't want to build. He wanted to inherit. When he turned 18, I paid for his first college degree in economics. He lasted 3 months, said it was too boring. I didn't scold him, just sighed and paid for another semester when he decided to switch to communications. That one ended even faster. He stopped going to class, spent most of his time in bars, and blamed professors for not understanding his creativity. I remember sitting in my office late one night holding another tuition invoice, wondering when my sacrifices had turned into his expectation. Still, I tried to believe in him. I thought maybe he just needed time, a little more guidance, a little more love. But when I finally told him I wouldn't fund another restart, that it was time for him to find a job, earn something of his own, he exploded. He stood in the living room, red-faced, fists clenched, shouting words that cut deeper than any blade. "You only care about money. You never loved me, not really." His voice cracked with rage, but there was no pain in it, only spite. I tried to speak, but he was already grabbing his coat, slamming the door so hard that the frame rattled. And just like that, he was gone. No calls, no letters, no holidays. 3 years of silence, each one heavier than the last. I used to imagine he'd call one day, say he was sorry, maybe even thank me, but that call never came. Now, looking at him standing in my hospital room, I see that the boy I raised, the one who once held my hand at the county fair, the one who promised he'd take care of me when I got old, disappeared long ago. In his place stands a man who learned only how to take. When Charles passed away, I wrote Liam a letter by hand, my old-fashioned way of reaching out, when words over the phone felt too fragile. I still remember the ink smudging at the end of the line where my hand trembled. "Your stepfather loved you like his own," I wrote. "If you ever want to come home, this door will always be open." It was a short letter, honest and simple. I sealed it with the hope that maybe, just maybe, a mother's words could find their way through the silence. But when the funeral came, his seat stayed empty. The wind that morning was cold, carrying the scent of crushed grapes from the vineyard nearby. The same scent that once meant harvest and joy now felt like loss. People came and went, offering condolences, placing their hands gently on my shoulder. Yet all I could see was that one vacant chair, the one I had saved for my son. Standing there, I felt as if part of my heart had been buried along with Charles. After the funeral, I realized something had shifted inside me. Grief no longer felt like an ache to be cured, but like a truth to be accepted. I made a decision not out of despair, but out of clarity. I would retire from the vineyard. Harper Vineyards didn't need me to survive anymore. It needed someone younger, someone who could lead with fresh purpose. So I called Michael Charles's nephew. He was a good man, steady, humble, and honest, with a degree in agricultural management and the same quiet integrity that had defined Charles. When I handed him the keys to the office, I told him, "Protect this place as if it were family, not business." He nodded, eyes bright, and in that moment, I felt a rare peace. I sold the big house and moved to a small cottage in Napa Valley, a place where the air smelled of lavender and quiet. My days became simple. I rose early, brewed green tea, read old novels, and tended to my flowers. I learned how to live without noise, without duty, without the ache of waiting for a call that would never come. Some evenings, I would sit on the porch, the setting sun painting the fields gold, and think of Charles. His laughter still echoed in the wind, his lessons still rooted in the soil we once shared. And though the loneliness never left completely, it grew softer like a familiar tune. I began to understand that love, even when it's gone, can still hold you up, and that sometimes letting go is not an act of loss, but of survival. For a while, peace found me quiet, unassuming, almost tender. My days followed a gentle rhythm, morning tea by the window, lavender blooming outside the hum of life without chaos. I joined a local senior community group, mostly widows and retirees like me, women who had built their lives from discipline and loss. They called me the Vineyard Lady, and I began teaching small workshops titled Farm Management for Independent Women. Watching them take notes, eyes bright with curiosity, gave me a sense of purpose again. Even in peace, motherhood never leaves you. Every month I sent money to Liam's account, not much, but enough to remind him he still had someone who cared. He never replied. No calls, no thank you, no message to say he was alive. Still, I convinced myself he was just ashamed that maybe silence was his way of trying to become better. Hope, after all, is a stubborn thing, especially for a mother. Then about a year later, my health began to falter. What started as fatigue turned into tremors and blurred vision. The doctor's voice was calm but firm. My diabetes had worsened. I needed constant monitoring. I checked into the hospital quietly without telling anyone. I didn't want pity, and I certainly didn't want Liam to know. Some wounds I had learned are better protected than exposed. But secrets have a way of slipping out. A nurse from the old town must have recognized my name on the patient list. Perhaps she told someone who told someone else. News travels faster than intention, especially in small places like Napa. One cloudy afternoon, as the rain tapped gently on the window, I was half asleep when the door opened. The light shifted, and I smelled something familiar, cologne. I hadn't forgotten the same scent Liam used to wear when he was a teenager, trying to impress girls. I opened my eyes. There he was, my son. Older now, but colder too. His hair slicked back, his smile rehearsed, and beside him stood a woman young and beautiful, her expression soft, but her eyes sharp as glass. She carried herself like someone already measuring the room for profit. Liam stepped forward, his voice steady, polite, too polite. "Hi, Mom. You look weaker than I expected." In that instant, the air thickened. The years of silence, the missing seat at the funeral, the unanswered letters, they all came rushing back. I could see it now clear as day. He hadn't come back for love. He had come back for business. After retiring, I settled into a quiet rhythm in my small cottage in Napa Valley. The house sat between rolling hills of vineyards where the morning fog wrapped the land like silk. I woke early each day to make a pot of mint tea, letting the steam warm my hands before I opened the window to breathe in the scent of dew and grapes. Afternoons were for long walks with Daisy, my old golden retriever, who had learned my every step. Sometimes on cooler days, I volunteered at the local co-op, teaching young farmers about organic grape cultivation. It wasn't about business anymore, it was about legacy, about passing on what life had taught me. I had convinced myself I'd learned to let go. No more waiting for calls that never came. No more wondering where Liam was or what kind of life he lived. But deep down, some wounds never heal. They only learn how to hide. Inside my worn leather wallet behind my ID and grocery receipts, I kept a single photograph. Liam at 12 years old, his smile wide, his hair messy from the harvest field. Sometimes when no one was looking, I would take it out, trace the outline of his face, and whisper a prayer I no longer believed would be answered. People in the neighborhood respected me. They saw me as a woman who had built her life with her own hands and still carried herself with grace. The barista at the corner cafe always greeted me as Miss Harper, refusing to call me ma'am. The florist down the street often gave me fresh sprigs of lavender because it matches your calm, he'd say. I didn't tell him that calm wasn't something I was born with. It was something I fought for every single day. For a while, it truly felt like peace. Quiet mornings, meaningful work, small kindnesses from strangers who had come to care for me. I thought I had finally reached the chapter of life where nothing could hurt me anymore. But peace, I've learned, is fragile. It doesn't shout before it leaves. It slips away silently, one heartbeat at a time. That morning started like any other. The kettle hissed softly. The smell of mint filled the kitchen, and sunlight spilled through the lace curtains. I remember bending down to rinse the teacup, and then suddenly the world blurred. The edges of the room tilted, colors fading into white. My hand reached for the counter, but my body wouldn't follow. The last thing I heard was the cup shattering against the floor before everything went dark. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor's voice was calm, but heavy. "Mrs. Turner, it's a complication from your diabetes. You'll need to stay for close monitoring." I nodded weakly, but inside, a quiet fear took root. I had spent my whole life fighting storms, and just when I thought the sky had cleared, another one was already forming. I had checked into the hospital quietly, hoping no one would know. I told the nurses not to contact my family. There was no one I wanted to worry. The days passed in silence, the kind that wraps around you like fog. I read a few books, drank bitter tea from the cafeteria, and tried to convince myself it was just another small setback, a pause before I could return home to my little garden in Napa. 2 weeks later, during my morning glucose test, the nurse came in with a puzzled look. "Mrs. Turner," she said softly, "there's a man outside who says he's your son. He insists on visiting." My heart gave a slow, heavy beat. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Liam. The name I hadn't spoken aloud in years suddenly filled the air like a ghost stepping through the room. The door opened before I could respond. There he was, my son, standing in the doorway, with a carefully arranged smile and a bouquet of lilies in hand. His suit was too formal for a hospital visit. His tie perfectly straight, the kind of effort people make when they need to be seen. "Mom," he said, his voice polite but hollow. "I heard you were sick. I came as soon as I could." His words were smooth, but his eyes were restless, darting across the room as if taking inventory, the monitors, the IV line, the bag on the chair. He looked less like a son visiting his mother and more like a businessman assessing risk. Still, I forced myself to smile. "You came," I said quietly, "after all this time." Before I could say more, a young woman stepped forward. She was beautiful in a polished, practiced way. Hair curled perfectly, perfume thick enough to mask the smell of disinfectant. Her hands sparkled with jewelry, a diamond ring catching the sterile light. "I'm Lily Anderson," she said sweetly. "Liam's wife." The way she said it, poised deliberate like an actress announcing her role, told me everything I needed to know. I nodded slowly. "I see," I murmured, glancing at the ring again. Her smile tightened. Liam reached for her hand as if to complete the picture, the dutiful husband, the devoted couple. It was almost theatrical the way they stood there framed by the door pretending to care. They asked about my health, spoke in soft tones, and exchanged quick glances whenever I coughed or shifted in bed. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every word coated with the shine of good manners, but none of the warmth of love. Watching them, I realized the cruelest thing wasn't their greed. It was the performance of affection, the way they wore concern, like a costume, believing I was too weak to notice the seams. Liam sat beside my bed, his voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Mom," he began, eyes lowered, hands folded neatly in his lap. "I'm sorry. For everything. The last 3 years, I was wrong." He paused as if waiting for applause after a perfect line. His tone had that polished gentleness that comes from practice, not emotion. I had heard that voice before, the same tone he used as a boy, when he tried to lie about breaking a window, rehearsed to sound soft, harmless, believable. Before I could respond, the woman next to him leaned forward. "Lily." She dabbed at the corner of her perfectly made-up eyes, though I saw no tears there. "He's been thinking about you all the time," she said, her voice rich with fake tenderness. "He just didn't know how to face you after saying those hurtful things. He talks about you every night, Mrs. Turner. He regrets it deeply." The words rolled off her tongue too smoothly, like lines memorized from a script. Even her timing was perfect. The gentle touch on his arm, the way she looked at me between sentences, the quiver in her voice that was almost theatrical. I watched the two of them performing their scene as if the hospital room were their stage. I stayed quiet, studying them. Liam's head bowed at the exact moment hers tilted in sympathy, too synchronized, too deliberate. Their gestures mirrored each other, and I suddenly realized they had rehearsed this moment. Somewhere, maybe in a car on the way here, they had practiced how to look like a loving son and a devoted daughter-in-law. It was a good performance, but not good enough for someone who had spent her whole life reading faces and silences. Inside me, something shifted. Not relief, not forgiveness, something colder, sharper. Instinct. The same instinct that once told me when a wine barrel had gone bad before anyone else could smell it. The air between us tasted the same way, spoiled, artificial. I wanted to believe them. God knows a mother always wants to believe her child has come home out of love. But my gut whispered otherwise. Their eyes were too clear, their words too convenient, their timing too perfect. I looked at Liam and thought, when someone returns at the perfect moment, it's rarely because of love. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. 3 years, I said softly. That's a long time to rehearse an apology. When I finally asked, my voice was gentle, almost casual. So I said, folding my hands together, "Where did the two of you get married?" Lily let out a short laugh too sharp to sound natural. "Oh, in New York," she said brightly, her tone coated with sugar and pride. "At the Plaza Hotel. It was beautiful, just a small ceremony, only close friends and family." She spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from a story told too many times. Her eyes glittered, searching my face for admiration. "The Plaza," I repeated softly, pretending to smile. I'd been to that hotel once years ago when Charles and I attended a wine expo. I remembered the gold chandeliers, the velvet halls, the way everything there seemed touched by wealth. But somehow, hearing her say it, now felt off, like a dress that didn't quite fit. Liam jumped in quickly, his tone defensive but coated with charm. "We were going to tell you after Mom, but you were so upset with me then. I didn't want to make things worse." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't anger that rose inside me, it was something quieter, heavier, sadness. That he could say it so easily, rewrite the truth, as if I had been the one to close the door. I looked at him, this grown man who once clung to my skirt when he was scared, and wondered when lies became so effortless for him. Then Lily placed a hand on her stomach, her smile stretching wider. "Anyway," she said sweetly, "you're going to be a grandmother soon. I'm 4 months pregnant." The room seemed to pause for a beat. I blinked, my gaze falling to her belly, perfectly flat beneath her fitted dress. Not a trace of swelling, not even the softness of early pregnancy. My eyes lingered there a second longer, long enough to see her fingers press just a little too deliberately against the fabric, like she wanted to draw my attention. I nodded slowly, careful not to show what I felt. 4 months, I said quietly. That's wonderful news. But inside, the truth stirred like a whisper. Her story didn't add up. The flawless makeup, the tight dress, the way she avoided my eyes when she mentioned the baby. It was all too neat, too staged. I leaned back against the pillow, studying them both. Liam sat up straighter, eager to maintain the illusion, while Lily smiled like an actress holding her final pose. For a moment, I almost pitied them, two people trying so hard to look perfect that they'd forgotten how to be real. And yet beneath their performance, something fragile had cracked. The first small fracture in their story had appeared, and I knew from years of reading people that once a lie begins to splinter, the truth never stays buried for long. Liam reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, placing it neatly on the small table beside my hospital bed. "This is the new will, Mom," he said, voice smooth, too calm. "It's better to sign it now while you're still here so I can handle everything for you." His tone carried the same practiced patience I'd once heard in real estate agents or men trying to sell something they didn't quite believe in. Before I could answer, Lily stepped closer. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, her perfume heavy enough to drown out the sterile scent of the room. "We just want to make things easier for you," she added sweetly, though there was steel in her voice. "You'll be taken care of, Mrs. Turner. We'll handle everything. You just need to sign." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting out a tired breath, pretending to rest. The truth was, my mind had never been clearer. I heard the rustle of papers, the faint click of a pen being uncapped, and then Liam's voice again, lower now, impatient. "Mom, it's really simple. Just your signature. It's all legal." Legal. That word caught my attention. Slowly, I opened my eyes, my gaze falling on the top of the document. The font was wrong, too modern, too informal for any legitimate legal draft. There was no attorney's letterhead, no witness line, and worst of all, the bold text near the bottom made my pulse slow in disbelief. Beneficiary: Liam Turner and Lily Anderson. A forged will. Cheaply done, yet bold enough to insult my intelligence. I kept my expression soft, almost frail, as if the weight of the world pressed down on my shoulders. Inside, however, a quiet heat spread through me, not anger, but clarity. This was no longer a misunderstanding, no desperate attempt to reconcile. It was a plan. A calculated betrayal wrapped in the disguise of concern. Lily leaned closer, her voice syrupy but cold. "Sign it now, Mom. Once you do, we can start taking care of everything. You don't have to worry about a single thing again." I almost laughed. The irony was bitter that they thought the woman who built a vineyard from dust could be fooled by paper and pretty words. I looked at the signature line at the empty space waiting for my name and smiled faintly. They mistook my silence for weakness. Good. Let them. I would give them exactly what they wanted: time. Time to reveal how deep their greed ran, time to dig their own graves. If it was a game, I had played it longer and far better. I turned my face toward the window, eyes half closed, and said softly, "Leave it here. I'll look at it later." My voice trembled just enough to sound tired. Liam nodded relief, flickering across his face. They thought victory was close, but in truth, it had already slipped from their hands. I looked straight at him, letting the silence stretch until even the sound of the monitor seemed too loud. Then I said quietly, "Liam, what is this really about? You didn't come here because of my health, did you?" For a moment, he froze, just a flicker. But I saw it. The mask slipped. The fake warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by something darker. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. "Mom," he said, each word slow and heavy, "if you don't sign, you'll die. And no one will even know." He lingered on that word "die," letting it hang between us like a loaded weapon. There was no trembling in his voice, no trace of guilt or shame. It wasn't a threat said in anger. It was cold, rehearsed, meant to terrify. He looked at me with the calm certainty of someone who had already imagined how far he could go. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My son, the child I once carried in my arms through storms, who used to cry over scraped knees, was now standing before me, eyes sharp as a blade, calculating whether I was easier to control alive or dead. Lily stood behind him, silent, but her face gave her away. She didn't flinch. Her arms crossed lightly, her expression unreadable, but the faint smirk at the corner of her mouth told me she already knew what he was capable of. Perhaps she had even encouraged it. The air in the room thickened, sterile but suffocating. My pulse slowed, my thoughts sharpened. I had faced Storm's business rivals and betrayal before, but this was different. This was blood. And blood, when poisoned by greed, turns colder than ice. Still, I didn't let fear show. I adjusted my blanket slightly, keeping my tone calm. "Is that what you think it takes to be a man now, Liam?" I asked. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He just stared, daring me to react, waiting for me to break. Inside, however, my mind was already turning like clockwork. Under U.S. law, what he had just done, the threat, the coercion, the attempt to make me sign away my estate, could be classified as elder abuse and financial coercion. Serious crimes, punishable by prison. I didn't need to fight him here. I just needed to make sure every word, every look, every gesture was recorded. I glanced subtly toward the small voice recorder hidden under my pillow, something my lawyer had advised me to keep ever since the estate rumors began. Its light blinked faintly, steady alive. So I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only a mother can wear, even when she's staring at her child's betrayal. "You should be careful what you say, Liam," I whispered. "Sometimes words have longer lives than people do." My finger hovered over the small red button on the side of the bed. Liam's words still echoed in my ears, sharp and venomous, but my mind was already shifting gears. I had learned long ago that survival wasn't about strength, it was about timing. So I pressed the nurse call button and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Excuse me, I'm feeling some chest pain." The words came out steady, almost casual, but I saw the flicker of irritation cross Liam's face. He knew what I was doing. I wasn't calling for help because of pain, I was calling for witnesses. Within seconds, the hallway buzzed with movement. The door opened, and a nurse stepped in, followed by another staff member with a blood pressure cuff and clipboard. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room again, washing away the poisonous tension that had settled moments ago. Lily tried to recover first. She put on her sweetest smile. "Oh, she's fine," she said lightly. "Mom just gets a little anxious sometimes." But her voice was too bright, too rehearsed. The nurse barely glanced at her before turning to me. "Mrs. Turner, are you all right?" I felt a sharp pain, I said evenly. "Maybe stress. It's been a long morning." I met Liam's eyes as I spoke, holding his gaze just long enough to remind him that every second he stayed in this room was now being recorded. Not by me this time, but by professionals with legal documentation and time-stamped reports. The nurse adjusted the monitor, her presence transforming the energy in the room. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening as he realized the trap had closed. Anything he said or did now would be noted. Every look, every gesture, every word was no longer between us. It was in the hospital's record. As they checked my vitals, I breathed slowly, my mind already moving several steps ahead. Under U.S. law, medical staff are mandatory reporters for elder abuse and coercion. If I played this carefully, their notes could later serve as independent testimony. The hospital system would automatically log the time of my distress call, linking it to the exact moment of Liam's presence. I kept my tone soft, my demeanor calm, the picture of a fragile woman simply needing care. But inside, I was steady focused. For the first time that day, I felt control tilt back toward me. They thought I was weak, but they had forgotten one thing. Even in a hospital gown, I still had power. The power to turn their scheme into evidence. When the nurse asked whether I wanted to rest, I nodded. "Yes, thank you," I said quietly. Then I turned to Liam and Lily with a faint smile. "You two should go get some air. I'll be fine." They hesitated, unsure if defiance or retreat would look worse. In the silence that followed, the beeping monitor seemed to echo louder, steadier, like a heartbeat, reclaiming its rhythm. Without a word, I reached under the blanket and pressed the red nurse call button. My voice came out steady, almost too calm. "Excuse me," I said toward the intercom. "I'm feeling some chest pain." It was the perfect excuse, urgent enough to draw attention, yet ordinary enough to seem believable. Within seconds, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Liam froze, his expression tightening. For the first time, he looked unsure. Lily straightened her blouse, forcing a smile that wavered at the edges. The door opened, and two nurses stepped in, one with a stethoscope, the other pushing a cart. The air in the room shifted instantly. What had been a private, suffocating space now became an official one, watched, documented, and safe. "Mrs. Turner," the older nurse said kindly. "Can you describe the pain?" "It's sharp," I replied, pressing a hand lightly to my chest. Came on suddenly, right after some stressful conversation. Her eyes moved briefly to Liam and Lily. I could almost see the quiet calculation behind her professional expression. She didn't ask who they were, she didn't need to. The tension spoke for itself. Liam tried to recover his voice, forced into a polite tone. "We were just visiting my mother. She got emotional, that's all." The nurse nodded, but her pen was already moving, jotting notes on her clipboard. Every word, every timestamp, every witness in the room now existed in official hospital records. A small victory, quiet, invisible, but powerful. "Let's check your vitals," the younger nurse said, adjusting the monitor beside my bed. Her presence, her composure was like a wall between me and them. I could breathe again. Lily stepped back, clutching her handbag tightly. She looked annoyed. Her act of sympathy had nowhere to land under fluorescent light and medical observation. The nurses moved efficiently, checking my pulse, my pressure documenting everything. I watched expression calm, while inside my mind everything clicked into place. Every second they stood there was time. Time for me to think. Time for safety to rebuild around me. Time for their lies to unravel under the weight of record and witness. Under U.S. law, every interaction inside a hospital can be traced. Notes, reports, surveillance, timestamps. They didn't know it, but I had just placed them inside a legal cage. When the nurse finally said, "We'll keep monitoring you for a while," I smiled faintly. "Thank you," I whispered. I looked at Liam then, and for the first time, it was he who looked afraid. My son had power once, but at that moment all the power in the room belonged to me and to the little red button I had pressed. When the door finally closed behind them, the room went still again. The faint hum of the heart monitor was the only sound left. I lay there, my body heavy against the sheets, staring at the ceiling, until the blur in my vision turned into tears. They slid down quietly, tracing the corners of my face. But they weren't tears of fear, not of death, not of illness. They were the tears of a mother realizing that love had been replaced by greed. I had spent a lifetime working for him, not for myself, not even for wealth. Every long day under the California sun, every sleepless night beside the vineyard barrels, every bill I paid for his schooling, all of it was meant to give him a future. And now that future stood before me, dressed in fine clothes, armed with lies, and asking me to sign my own life away. That truth stung deeper than any physical pain I'd ever known. I turned my head toward the window, watching the afternoon light spill through the blinds. It shimmered across the floor, pale and cold. Once that light had been the same one, shining over Liam's childhood, golden and full of promise. Now it felt distant, unreachable, like the warmth of someone who no longer remembered how to love. For a moment, I let myself grieve not for my health, but for the son I had lost long before this day. The boy who used to run through the vineyard rows shouting, "Mom, look," was gone. In his place stood a man who measured love in inheritance and kindness in assets. That was the cruelty of it all, realizing that the worst kind of death isn't physical, but emotional, when the bond between mother and child dies quietly, while both are still breathing. But grief never stays long in people like me. It turns into something sharper: resolve. The tears dried on my cheeks as a thought formed, clear and cold. I cannot fight this with emotion. I will fight it with the law. I had seen too many people lose everything because they trusted family more than reason. I wouldn't make that mistake again. If Liam and Lily wanted a war over my legacy, I would give them one, not with anger, but with evidence. I would gather witnesses' records, legal proof, every thread that tied their deceit together. I pressed my palm against my heart and whispered to myself, "You've survived harder things, Harper. This will be no different." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt awake, painfully awake. That night, the hospital was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. I picked up my phone and dialed Michael's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm but alert, as if he'd been waiting for this call. "Aunt Harper," he said. "Is everything all right?" "Come to the hospital," I told him softly. "There's something I need to show you. Don't tell anyone." Half an hour later, Michael walked into my room, still in his work clothes, his expression tense with worry. I handed him the stack of papers that Liam had tried to make me sign earlier that day. His eyes scanned the pages quickly, his jaw tightening as he read the forged will. When I told him what Liam had said, that I would die, and no one would know the color drained from his face, "This isn't just manipulation," he said quietly. "This is criminal coercion." I nodded, "And I intend to make sure it's treated that way." Then, lowering my voice, I told him something only a handful of people knew. Before Charles passed, I transferred the majority of our estate into a revocable living trust. Everything, the vineyard, the accounts, the properties, is legally protected under the trust. Even if I had signed that forged will, it wouldn't have changed ownership. The assets can't move without the trustee's authorization. Michael exhaled deeply, relief and admiration mixing in his tone. "You were 3 steps ahead as always. The trust protects the assets, but to expose what they did, we'll need hard evidence. The threat, the forgery, everything has to be documented." We sat together sketching out a plan. Step 1. I would continue pretending to be weak, frail, confused, vulnerable. The more convinced Liam and Lily were that I was losing control, the bolder they'd become. Step 2. Michael would contact our family attorney, Ms. Reynolds, first thing in the morning. He'd warn her about the attempted forgery and the verbal threat, ensuring the firm began recording every legal communication related to my estate. Step 3. We'd arrange for surveillance small cameras and legally approved audio devices installed in my hospital room and later at home. Michael, being meticulous, reminded me that in California, one-party consent laws allow recording if one participant, me, is aware and agrees. That meant every word they spoke to me from this moment on could become admissible evidence. I watched as Michael wrote everything down in his notebook, his handwriting neat, his focus sharp. He looked up and met my eyes. "We'll handle this right, Aunt Harper," he said firmly. "No shortcuts, no anger, just truth." I smiled faintly, feeling the sting of pride in my chest. "Remember this, Michael," I said quietly. "We don't fight monsters by becoming them. We gather proof and let the law finish the job." He nodded, his voice steady. "Justice, not revenge." And as the clock ticked past midnight, I knew that the battle had already begun, not in rage but in strategy. As Michael sat by my bedside, the dim hospital light cast long shadows across the room. I spoke quietly, my voice steady but deliberate. "There's something you need to know," I said. "The truth is, the estate hasn't been under my name for years." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "After Charles passed," I continued, "I transferred everything into a trust, the Harper Foundation. It's a revocable living trust managed by my attorney, Ms. Reynolds. Every property, every account, every share of the vineyard, all of it was placed there." I paused, watching his eyes widen as he began to understand. "Legally, I don't own those assets anymore. The trust does." Michael blinked, stunned. "So even if they force you to sign a will, it would be useless," I finished for him. "The trust overrides any individual document. They could waive that forged will all they want, but it wouldn't change ownership." He exhaled relief, mixing with admiration. "You thought of everything." I smiled faintly. "Not everything, but I've learned that love without accountability is just a story people tell themselves. I trusted the law more than promises, and I've never regretted it." Then I leaned forward, slightly lowering my voice. "There's another detail. I added a clause, a forfeiture clause, years ago. It states that if any beneficiary intentionally harms or coerces the trustor, they lose their inheritance rights immediately. It was Charles's idea, actually. He used to say, 'Harper, protect the vineyard from both strangers and blood.'" Michael's eyes widened further. "So if Liam or Lily are proven to have threatened you or tried to manipulate you, they're out," I said firmly. "Completely. The clause ensures it. They can't challenge it in court without triggering the forfeiture. And everything the trust documents, the clause, even the trustee's witness notes, is legally binding." He sat back, shaking his head, half in awe, half in disbelief. "They really have no idea what they're walking into." I gave a soft, wry laugh. "No, they don't. They see me lying in this hospital bed and think I'm fragile. But what they don't understand is that strength isn't about shouting. It's about being prepared long before the storm hits. Michael nodded slowly, the admiration in his face unmistakable. You always did play the long game. I had to, I said, looking toward the window. In life, people break promises every day. But paper properly written and notarized never lies. The light from the hallway glowed faintly against the door, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. The law was already on my side, it just needed time to reveal it. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of my hospital room as Ms. Reynolds, my attorney, arrived with a stack of documents and her usual calm efficiency. Michael stood beside her, quiet but attentive. I adjusted my glasses, my decision already firm in my heart. We're going to update the trust, I told her. It's time it reflected something more than just bloodlines. She nodded, setting out the papers on the small table. The words "Amendment to the Harper Foundation Trust" gleamed faintly in the light. I explained the changes carefully, each word measured like the slow pouring of wine into a glass. A significant portion of the estate, I said, will be allocated to community causes, specifically to fund scholarships for orphaned children and to support diabetic patients who can't afford treatment. The foundation should stand for compassion, not greed. Ms. Reynolds smiled faintly as she took notes. That's a noble adjustment, Mrs. Turner. It strengthens the charitable purpose of the foundation, and legally, it's ironclad. Then I turned to Michael. As for the vineyard, I said softly, it belongs with someone who values it, not just owns it. I'm transferring full operational rights to you and your wife. But there's one condition: 20% of the annual profits must go to local education programs. The vineyard was built from this soil, so it should give back to the people who make it thrive. Michael's eyes glistened. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. Aunt Harper, I raised a hand gently. Don't thank me. Just make sure it means something. We reviewed the details line by line. Every clause, every signature, every witness, everything had to be done right. 2 nurses came in to serve as witnesses, their faces solemn as Ms. Reynolds explained the procedure. My signature came last, a steady line across the bottom of the final page, not shaking, not hesitant. When the pen left this paper, I felt something loosen inside me. A quiet release, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. For years, I'd believed that money could hold a family together. I built walls of security, thinking love could grow within them. But love, I had learned, does not need walls, it needs freedom. And freedom for me came not from keeping wealth, but from giving it purpose. As Ms. Reynolds gathered the signed papers into her folder, she said, "Everything is legally binding now, Mrs. Turner. This document can't be revoked or challenged without clear evidence of fraud." I nodded, my gaze drifting toward the window where the light had turned golden. Good, I murmured. Let them fight over shadows if they want. The real legacy is already out of their reach. I asked Michael to come early while the hospital still smelled of disinfectant and the corridors were quiet. He arrived with his toolbox and his steady hands, eyes sharp and careful. I told him exactly what I needed, speaking in that low, practical voice I had used for decades when making plans on the farm. Place a tiny camera inside the picture frame opposite my bed. I said something no one would notice. Something small as a coin and connected to the cloud. Make sure the angle catches the visitors and the papers on the bedside table, and encrypt the feed so only you and my attorney can access it. Michael nodded without fuss, the way he always did when a job required accuracy rather than drama. While he worked, I asked the head nurse to start a formal visitor log. I explained that it was for medical reasons, to track who came in during irregular hours, and she agreed with professional sympathy. She brought a clipboard and a pen and set out a neat sign-in sheet. Every visitor would have to sign, print their name, and note the time. That small piece of paper would become more valuable than any testimony if trouble came. The nurse raised an eyebrow when I mentioned it, and then smiled and said that hospitals keep careful records by habit. I felt gratitude for her competence. In my life, I had learned the power of records, the way a ledger could save a life or condemn a liar. Michael also made a discreet call to our family attorney and to the local police department. He told them that we suspected elder coercion and that we wanted to document everything in case the situation escalated. The police sergeant listened and replied that they appreciated the heads up and would make a note in their system. My attorney advised patience and legal rigor and told Michael to preserve any digital files and keep the hardware chain of custody intact. I heard their voices faint through the speaker on Michael's phone and felt a thin thread of comfort. The law would not act on feelings, but it would act on facts, on timestamps, and signed pages, and recorded behavior. When the hidden camera was in place and the visitor log was printed, I sat back and let the plan breathe. I pretended to nap more deeply than I felt. I practiced the small gestures of frailty that would lure them into complacency. The slow breath, the shallow smile, the slight tremor when I reached for a glass. I also rehearsed the moment I would press the nurse, call the calibrated pause that would bring a witness into the room at the precise instant. All of this was not deception for deception's sake. It was strategy, a careful chess of survival. I knew hospitals could be fortresses of evidence. Nurses wrote notes, machines stamped times, cameras recorded angles, and visitor logs tied names to moments. If Liam or Lily tried anything, they would do it in a room watched by professionals and by a device I owned. I felt resourceful in a way that surprised me. This was not a loud rebellion. It was a quiet, methodical reclaiming of control. I had built vineyards from soil and sweat. Now I was building a legal trap out of paper witnesses and light, and I intended to watch the world fall into the shape of justice I had planned. I began my performance the very next morning. It wasn't hard. Age already gives you the tools to look fragile if you know how to use them. I let my hands tremble slightly when I reached for my cup, spoke slower, let my words trail off as if I had lost my train of thought. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence and stare at the window for a few seconds before blinking back to the present. It wasn't real confusion. It was strategy. I needed Liam to believe I was fading, that my mind was slipping away, just enough to make me legally vulnerable. It worked faster than I expected. When Liam visited that afternoon, his tone changed. He spoke to me as if I were already half gone, his voice filled with forced patience and barely hidden condescension. "Mom," he said slowly, like a nurse speaking to a child, "you don't have to worry about anything. Just rest. I'll handle the documents for you." I nodded faintly, murmuring, "Of course, dear. You're always so good with paperwork." The satisfaction in his eyes told me I had him exactly where I wanted. Lily, however, was easier to read. She came almost every day now, all smiles and false tenderness. She brought me homemade soups, juices, even boxes of organic vitamins that looked suspiciously untouched themselves. "I want you to get your strength back, Mrs. Turner," she would say, pressing a cup of orange juice into my hand. "This one has extra ginseng. It's good for memory." I smiled, pretending gratitude. "How thoughtful of you," I said, then waited until she left before quietly handing the cup to the nurse. I had already made a private request to the head nurse. If I show any strange symptoms, keep the food samples and record what I ate. She agreed, noting it in my file. From that moment, every sip and every bite became part of a chain of custody, a silent legal shield. When Liam returned again with more papers, I played my role to perfection. My voice was soft, uncertain. "You can leave them there, dear. I'll look later once I remember where I put my glasses. He smiled, proud and careless, placing the folder right beside my bed. I let him see me as helpless. That was the trick predators always relax when they think the prey has stopped running. I even faked dozing off mid-conversation, letting my head fall slightly to the side, my breaths slow and shallow. Liam whispered something to Lily, then something he assumed I wouldn't catch. But I did. "She'll sign soon," he muttered. "Just a few more visits." I kept my eyes closed, holding my expression of frailty, but inside, a quiet fire burned. Let them believe the act. Let them walk right into their own trap. The weaker they thought I was, the stronger I became. 3 days later, they came back the visit I had been waiting for. Liam pushed the door open with a polished smile, the kind people wear when they think the game is already won. Lily followed close behind, carrying a wicker basket tied with golden ribbon. Inside were a thermos of chicken soup, a bottle of freshly squeezed orange juice, and a thick folder, the kind printed to look official. Mom Lily cooed, her voice dripping honey. "I brought you some soup. You need to eat well, so you'll have strength to sign." She placed the bowl gently on the table, the porcelain clinking softly against the metal tray. Her smile was tender, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction, the confidence of a predator mistaking its prey for weak. I gave her my best fragile smile, hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, dear," I whispered. "I'm lucky you two still remember me." My tone was gentle, grateful even, but there was an edge beneath it, a soft blade hidden behind every word. Liam stood beside the bed, adjusting his tie like a man preparing for a deal, not a family visit. "Mom," he said, his voice smooth, "this is just a small update. The last draft had some typos. You don't even need to read everything, just your signature on the last page will do." "Oh," I murmured weakly. "How efficient you are." What he didn't know was that everything in that room was already part of my design. Behind the door down the hall, Michael stood with his phone connected to the cloud feed from the hidden camera. In another building nearby, my lawyer, Ms. Reynolds, sat in her office with 2 local officers from the Financial Crimes Division watching the live recording. Every sound, every word, every movement was being documented in real time. I lifted the spoon slowly, pretending to sip the soup Lily had brought. "So thoughtful of you," I said softly, though the nurse had already tested the contents earlier. Nothing harmful this time, but the pattern was consistent enough to be damning. Lily leaned closer. "We just want what's best for you," she said, almost whispering. "Once this is signed, you'll never have to worry again." I looked up at her, my expression still soft. "Is that so?" I asked quietly. "Never again." She nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mrs. Turner. Everything will be handled. You can just rest." The moment was almost cinematic, the predator unaware that the cameras had been rolling long before she arrived. I reached for the folder slowly, as if struggling to lift it. Liam helped pushing it toward me, pen uncapped and ready. Then I met his eyes. "You always were good at organizing things," I said, my voice steady now. "Let's make sure this one is recorded properly, too." The words hung in the air for half a second, just long enough for the tiny red light on the hidden camera to blink twice. I lifted the glass of orange juice, letting the sunlight hit it just right. Golden, innocent, almost beautiful. But the moment it touched my lips, I knew. The taste was wrong. It wasn't the faint tang of citrus I knew so well. It was bitter, sharp, faintly metallic. My tongue burned slightly before I even swallowed. I set the glass down slowly, making sure not to spill a drop, and smiled as if nothing had happened. Inside, my pulse stayed calm. I'd been expecting this. While pretending to adjust the blanket on my lap, I pressed my palm lightly against the small button hidden beneath it, the trigger for the camera built into the picture frame across the room. A soft vibration confirmed it was live. Under my pillow, another device, a small voice recorder, began transmitting directly to the cloud server Michael had set up. Everything was now being documented. Their faces, their voices, their every word. Lily leaned closer, her perfume sweet enough to make the air feel heavy. "Don't worry, Mrs. Turner," she said cheerfully. "I added some extra vitamins to your juice. It helps with memory. Keeps you sharp." Her smile was dazzling, practiced the same kind you'd see in a photo shoot, not a hospital room. "Oh," I said, my tone faint and shaky. "That's very kind of you, dear." Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the reflection of the camera light blinking faintly in the glass cabinet, a heartbeat of truth hidden in plain sight. In its frame, the scene looked perfect. Lily's manicured hand stirring the glass with a spoon. Liam standing beside her with the folder labeled "Last Will and Testament," placed neatly on the tray table. Everything positioned like a stage set for greed. Liam checked his watch and nodded toward the papers. "Mom, once you've had your juice, we'll go over this quickly. It's just a formality. The lawyer can't process things unless it's signed." I let out a soft laugh, weak but deliberate. "Of course, darling. Just let me finish this first." I lifted the glass again, pretending to sip, and set it down with exaggerated effort, my fingers trembling just enough to sell the illusion. Lily exchanged a satisfied glance with Liam, exactly the reaction I wanted. They thought the act was working. They thought I was compliant, slow-slipping further each day. The camera caught it all. Her stirring motion, the faint smile she gave, the words "helps with memory." The audio would later reveal the subtle tremor in her tone when she lied. And the forensic report, the one that would analyze that juice sample I'd already asked the nurse to preserve, would tell the rest of the story. For now, I sat back, feigning fatigue. The light hit the cup, glinting like liquid gold. But in truth, it was poison. Not for me, but for them. Liam stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the bed, his voice stripped of the false gentleness he'd practiced for days. "Mom," he said sharply, "sign it now. Don't make this harder than it has to be. This is for your own good." Lily, standing at his shoulder, crossed her arms and let out a quiet laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Mother," she added coolly. "You should sign it while you still can, before you're no longer of sound mind." Her words hung in the air like ice. I let my hands tremble slightly, my breathing uneven, the image of a woman too tired to fight. Inside, though, every thought was clear, deliberate, rehearsed. I gave them the look they wanted, fear mixed with resignation, and whispered, "All right, if that's what you both want." Liam exhaled with relief, mistaking submission for surrender. He opened the folder and slid the papers toward me, placing the pen neatly on top. The same Mont Blanc pen they'd used the first time, black lacquer gleaming under the fluorescent light. My fingers hovered for a second, then I took the pen. My hand shook just enough to look frail, but the stroke I made on the page was confident, exact. I signed on the line they had pointed to the same document my lawyer and I had drafted secretly the night before. It looked identical to the forged version Liam had prepared, except for one crucial sentence buried halfway through. "This document shall be null and void if signed under coercion, duress, or manipulation." Liam didn't notice. Neither did Lily. They only saw ink meet paper, their supposed victory. "See," Lily said softly, exchanging a glance with Liam. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I smiled, faintly lowering the pen. "No, dear," I murmured. "Not hard at all." Then for the first time in days, I looked up not as a frail patient, but as Harper Turner, the woman who had built her own fortune and outlasted storms fiercer than this. My eyes locked directly on the frame across the room, where the hidden camera's lens glinted almost imperceptibly in the light. I let my expression shift, a spark of clarity, a flash of triumph, behind calm composure. That single glance was enough. The audience watching from the lawyer's office would see it too, the transformation the exact second the game turned. Liam didn't notice the change. He was too busy gathering the papers, his movements quick and greedy. He believed everything was finally his. But for me, that signature wasn't a surrender. It was a weapon perfectly timed and legally precise. Every word, every line, every moment had been planned to the second. As I leaned back on the pillow, I whispered almost to myself, "It's done." But the truth was, it was only beginning. Liam let out a deep breath, his shoulders finally relaxing, as if a heavy burden had just been lifted. Lily, triumphant, gathered the signed papers with a satisfied smile curling on her lips. Finally, she whispered, "Now everything will be in order." She smoothed the folder with the care of someone touching her own victory. But before they could take a single step toward the door, it swung open with a loud metallic click. The sound sliced through the quiet like thunder. Two uniformed officers entered, followed closely by Ms. Reynolds, my attorney, and Michael right behind them. The expression on Lily's face froze. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly it was almost visible. I adjusted the blanket on my lap and looked up, my voice calm, precise, and sharper than I'd sounded in years. "Officers," I said clearly, "these are the two individuals who attempted to coerce me into signing falsified legal documents and to administer substances without my consent." The air in the room shifted cold, heavy electric. Liam turned toward me, confusion and disbelief flashing across his face. "Mom, what are you talking about? That's not—" Before he could finish, one of the officers raised a hand. "Sir, everything you've said and done here has been recorded," he said firmly. "We have live footage transmitted directly to the district attorney's office. You may want to remain silent until your attorney arrives." Lily stammered, her voice cracking under pressure. No, we were just trying to help. I made her juice, that's all. She's confused." Ms. Reynolds stepped forward, her briefcase in hand, tone calm but cutting. "That's quite enough. The video shows you pouring the liquid, adding an unverified supplement, and instructing Mrs. Turner to sign under threat. There's no misunderstanding here." Liam's expression twisted from arrogance to panic. "You can't prove anything," he shouted. But even as he spoke, Michael quietly pulled out his phone and showed him the live stream still rolling, his own face, staring back from the frame, caught in crystal clarity. "The show is over," Michael said, his voice deep and steady as he looked them both in the eye. The officers stepped forward to read their rights, their tones measured and formal. Lily started to cry, her hands trembling, while Liam stood frozen, jaw tight, eyes darting between the cops, the lawyer, and me. I sat still, breathing evenly, my eyes never leaving them. I had no anger left, only the cold satisfaction of a woman who had been underestimated one time too many. As they were escorted out, Ms. Reynolds gave me a subtle nod. The quiet hum of the camera in the corner was still running, capturing the final moments of their downfall. And for the first time in years, the air around me felt clean again. Liam's face twisted with rage, veins visible at his temples. "You set me up!" he shouted, his voice cracking between anger and disbelief. His words echoed through the sterile hospital room, breaking the stunned silence of nurses and patients passing by the door. I met his eyes calmly, my tone soft, but carrying the weight of iron. "No," I said, steady and clear. "I didn't set a trap. I only showed you that the truth doesn't need traps, it only needs light." The room went still. Even the machines seemed to quiet for a moment. Then one of the officers stepped forward, reading Lily her Miranda rights with measured precision. She tried to pull away panic, overtaking the smug confidence she'd worn just minutes before. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut was sharp and final, a perfect public sound of karma. Lily's protest fell apart into broken gasps. "Wait, please, it's a misunderstanding," she cried, but no one moved to help her. Around us, a few nurses paused, whispering to one another. Their eyes widened as they realized what was happening. The elegant visitor who had pretended to care for the old woman was being arrested for coercion and attempted poisoning. The officer guided Lily toward the door, and I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass, her perfect hair now disheveled, her face drained of color. For someone who loved appearances, humiliation was the harshest punishment of all. Liam stood frozen beside the bed, trembling, as the second officer handed him a printed copy of the evidence file. The front page showed still images from the hidden camera, him leaning over me, his hand pointing to the signature line, his mouth forming the words, "Sign it now." "You might want to contact your lawyer," the officer said flatly. "Everything has been verified and time-stamped." Liam looked at me one last time. His eyes, once filled with self-assurance, were now hollow, frightened, almost childlike. For a fleeting second, I saw not the manipulative man he'd become, but the boy I once held when he was afraid of thunderstorms. Then the image vanished as quickly as it came. He didn't speak again as they led him out of the room, his steps unsteady. The door closed behind them with a quiet, heavy click, the kind of sound that means something is truly over. I exhaled slowly and adjusted myself upright in bed. My hands still trembled, but not from weakness. It was the tremor of release, of dignity reclaimed after years of silence and betrayal. Looking at the nurse standing nearby, I managed a faint smile. "I've lost my son," I said softly, "but I've found justice." And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The footage from the hidden camera was submitted to the Napa County Police Department by my attorney the very next morning. Within hours, investigators were gathered around a monitor, watching every second in stunned silence. There was no ambiguity left. The video captured everything: Liam leaning over my bed, his voice sharp and threatening, Lily stirring the glass of orange juice, and that chilling line that sealed their fate. "If you don't sign, you'll die, and no one will know." The audio recording synced perfectly with the video, contained their voices, the date, and the timestamp, down to the second. When the forensic lab analyzed the remaining samples of juice and soup, the results confirmed the presence of a controlled sedative, the same compound often found in cases of slow poisoning. The chain of evidence was airtight. Ms. Reynolds presented it all in a single, well-organized file: video proof, voice recordings, toxicology reports, and the forged will. Every document told the same story, not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, but a calculated act of greed. The police report summarized it in clear legal terms: conspiracy to commit fraud and coercion, elder abuse, and attempted poisoning. For once, the law didn't hesitate. Warrants were issued that afternoon. Liam and Lily Turner were arrested at their rented home in Vallejo before they could destroy any documents or flee. When the story broke, it spread faster than wildfire. Local news stations aired the footage under headlines like "Son and daughter-in-law accused of poisoning elderly mother for inheritance caught on camera." The community in Napa Valley, the same people who had admired Harper Vineyards for decades, reacted with disbelief and outrage. At the farmer's market, neighbors whispered over baskets of grapes and fresh bread. "Did you hear? Her own son tried to kill her," someone murmured, "and she caught him on camera." The video, later leaked online, became symbolic, a haunting reminder of how greed can destroy a family. Comment sections overflowed with support. "Justice for Mrs. Turner. She's the definition of strength. May every mother like her find her light." From behind bars, Liam and Lily's lawyers tried to spin a story about miscommunication and mental confusion, but the footage left no room for doubt. Every lie they'd told crumbled beneath the weight of evidence they themselves had created. And while the town buzzed with gossip, I stayed silent. I didn't need to say a word. The truth had already spoken for me. The courtroom in Sonoma County was filled to capacity that morning. The air buzzed with murmurs, camera shutters, and the faint creak of wooden benches as people squeezed in to witness the case that had shaken the valley. Most of the faces in the audience were women, silver-haired, dignified, wearing calm but determined expressions. One of them whispered to a reporter beside her, "We came because we want to see justice done." When Lily was called to the stand, she looked fragile. Her carefully styled hair, undone mascara, already streaked across her cheeks. Her voice quivered as she began her statement. "I never meant to hurt Mrs. Turner," she said, crying softly. "I only pretended to be pregnant so she would trust me again." The words drew gasps across the courtroom. But the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, calmly stepped forward, holding up a folder. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we have medical documentation from Senny.linn Medical Center dated 2 weeks before the arrest, confirming that Mrs. Anderson was not and has never been pregnant." The lie collapsed instantly. Lily covered her face, sobbing louder while the jury exchanged glances of quiet disgust. Then it was Liam's turn. He sat straighter, jaw clenched, still trying to project control. "It wasn't me," he insisted. "She made me do it. She said if I didn't help, she would leave me." His words hung in the air, brittle and desperate. But the prosecutor clicked the remote, and the courtroom monitors lit up with the footage, the same video that had been seen around the world. There was Liam's own voice, steady and commanding. "Sign it now, Mom. You don't want to make this worse." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Liam's attorney bowed his head slightly, knowing the case was lost. When the judge returned after a brief recess, her tone was grave but firm. "This court finds the defendants guilty of conspiracy, coercion, and elder abuse." Her gaze shifted to Liam. "Mr. Turner, you were entrusted with care and respect for your mother. Instead, you betrayed that trust for greed. You are hereby sentenced to 10 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 6. She turned to Lily. "Mrs. Anderson, while your role was lesser, your deceit and manipulation are inexcusable. You are sentenced to 3 years probation with supervision and are permanently prohibited from any contact with Mrs. Turner." The room broke into murmurs, not of outrage, but of relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps, capturing the moment. Lily was led away, pale and trembling, while Liam was handcuffed and escorted into the prison van. And through it all, I sat in the back row, calm and upright. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it restored something greater: my dignity. According to the terms in the Harper Foundation Trust, anyone found guilty of fraud, coercion, or abuse against the founder would be permanently removed from the list of beneficiaries. There were no loopholes, no appeals, no forgiveness clauses. It was a rule I had written myself years ago. At the time, I thought it was just a formality. I never imagined it would one day protect me from my own son. When the verdict became public, the consequences came fast and brutal. Within days, the bank managing my estate froze Liam and Lily's joint account, citing the clause that voided any financial connection to the foundation. Harper Vineyards, now officially under Michael's leadership, issued a statement confirming that both individuals were banned from any business dealings with the company. The words were polite, almost coldly professional, but everyone knew the meaning. They had been erased. The headlines came next. Heir to Napa Winery found guilty of fraud against his own mother. Couple loses fortune in family scandal. It was everywhere: newspapers, local radio, social media. The same people who once flattered Liam at fundraisers now avoided him in public. Invitations disappeared. His phone stopped ringing. Even their so-called friends in New York quietly blocked their numbers. The law firm handling their defense withdrew after weeks of unpaid fees. To cover legal costs, Liam and Lily sold their apartment in Manhattan, the one they had once boasted about being their forever home. But it wasn't enough. Debts piled up. Creditors came calling. Their luxury car was repossessed, and their names became a warning whispered among investors and business circles. Never mix greed with family wealth. The trust documents were explicit. Their inheritance was gone. Every cent that would have gone to them was redirected to charitable programs under Harper Foundation scholarships for orphaned children medical grants for diabetic patients, and small business loans for women in agriculture. Their downfall had ironically funded the very compassion they had tried to exploit. Months later, a local newspaper ran a headline across its front page, "When Greed Makes a Son Lose His Mother and Himself." Underneath was a photograph of Liam outside a courthouse, his face hollow, his once polished suit wrinkled, his eyes looking at the ground. I saw that image once, and I didn't keep the paper. There was no satisfaction in it, only a quiet, tired understanding. Karma didn't need to be loud. It simply returned balance, as it always does. The months that followed were a quiet kind of miracle. My recovery, the doctor said, bordered on the impossible. The infection had cleared, the fatigue faded, and my heart, both literal and emotional, had found its rhythm again. "It's your willpower that did it," my physician told me with a smile. "You refused to give up." And perhaps he was right. For the first time in years, I felt not old, not broken, but alive. Outside the hospital walls, life moved forward. Michael took full control of Harper Vineyards, managing it with the same precision and heart that Charles and I once did. He kept his promise. 20% of annual profits went directly into community projects for diabetic patients and orphaned children across California. The foundation grew faster than any of us expected, supported by volunteers, doctors, and women who said they saw themselves in my story. When the Harper Foundation held its first press conference, the hall was filled with journalists, community leaders, and families who had benefited from the new programs. The Vineyard's logo shimmered behind me, the familiar crest of intertwined vines and a single rising sun. I stood before the microphone, the flash of cameras painting the air with light. I took a breath, steady but soft. "There are wounds," I said, "that cannot be healed by money. They can only be healed by compassion and by justice." The room fell silent. Then applause rippled through the crowd, gentle at first, then stronger until it filled the space like a warm wind. It wasn't pride I felt, but peace. I wasn't speaking as a victim anymore, nor as someone who had survived betrayal. I was simply a woman who had chosen light over bitterness. After the conference, I walked through the vineyard with Michael. The air smelled of oak and ripe grapes, the same scent that had carried me through decades of labor and love. Rows of vines stretched under the afternoon sun, and in that moment, I realized the land had healed too. It no longer held memories of deceit, only the quiet dignity of rebirth. The community saw me differently now. People I'd never met stopped me at the market to thank me, calling me an inspiration or proof that strength has no age. But what mattered most wasn't admiration. It was knowing that my story had helped others believe in their own resilience. In the end, age hadn't made me weak. It had made me unbreakable. The afternoon sun stretched long over the vineyard, spilling gold across the rows of ripened grapes. The air was warm, humming with the quiet rhythm of summer. I walked slowly along the dirt path, feeling the familiar crunch of soil beneath my shoes, the scent of fruit and earth rising around me. Every step carried both memory and peace, echoes of what had been lost and gratitude for what had been restored. Michael followed a few paces behind, hands in his pockets, eyes gentle but curious. When we reached the highest row overlooking the valley, he finally spoke. "Do you ever regret it, Aunt Harper?" he asked softly. "Everything that happened." I turned to him and smiled, a calm, knowing smile. "No," I said, "because we didn't win through hatred. We won through truth." He nodded, and for a moment, neither of us said anything more. The wind moved gently through the vines, brushing against the leaves with a sound like quiet applause. The vineyard, once a place of turmoil and betrayal, now felt alive again, grounded whole. I carried a small bouquet of lavender and wild daisies in my hands as we walked toward the family plot. Charles's gravestone stood beneath the old oak tree, worn by weather but steady, like the man himself. I knelt down, brushing away a few dry leaves before setting the flowers against the stone. The lavender released its fragrance immediately, sharp, sweet, familiar. Charles murmured, "You see, we kept what we built. Not just the land, but the dignity that came with it." A soft breeze stirred my hair as if in answer. I could almost hear his voice, gentle and amused, telling me that I'd done well, that the strength he'd always admired in me had finally found its purpose. As I stood again, I looked across the fields. Workers moved slowly between the rows, laughter drifting faintly on the wind. Life had returned not perfect, but honest, and that was enough. There would always be scars, of course invisible ones buried deep, but they no longer ached. They had become part of the landscape of who I was, flawed, tested, but unbroken. Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "You gave this place a new life," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "It gave me one." The sun dipped lower, painting the hills in amber light. For the first time in years, I felt entirely still, not because everything was resolved, but because I'd finally made peace with what couldn't be. Justice had been served. But more than that, my soul was quiet. And as I turned to leave, I whispered to the wind, "Old age is not weakness. It's wisdom earned the hard way." The day I left the hospital, the air felt lighter than it had in months. The nurses waved goodbye, and I promised to visit again when the harvest began. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured over the valley, bathing the vineyards in gold. The grapes hung heavy and full, their skins glistening under the fading light. I walked slowly along the path until I reached my favorite bench beneath the olive tree, where the world always seemed to fall quiet. I took out my old leather journal, its pages soft, from years of being opened and closed, and began to write. "Sometimes family isn't something you have to avenge," I wrote. "Sometimes it's enough to stay clear-minded to protect what's right, without letting bitterness take root." My handwriting trembled a little, but the words came easily. For the first time, they didn't feel like pain. They felt like release. Afterward, I opened a blank sheet of paper and began another letter, this one addressed to Liam. My hand hesitated before the first line. "How do you write to someone who has tried to destroy you, yet still carries your blood? Dear Liam," I began. "I forgive you, but I do not forget. You took a path that cost us both too much. I can't give you back your freedom, but I can hope that in time you'll learn what it means to live with honesty. Use whatever years you have left to rebuild yourself, not for me, for you." I signed the letter simply. Mom folded it neatly and sealed it. Forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was a quiet decision to stop letting the wound define me. The wind carried the scent of ripe fruit and sun-warmed soil. I poured myself a cup of green tea from the thermos Michael had left that morning. The steam curled in the air, soft and familiar. I took a sip and looked toward the horizon, where the vineyard stretched endlessly into light. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the colors of endings and beginnings all at once. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally understood. Peace wasn't something the world gave you. It was something you chose, even after the storm. And maybe somewhere far away, Liam would one day understand that too. If you've ever been betrayed, but still chose to keep your dignity, tell your story. Somewhere someone might find courage in your truth, just as I found mine.